Ready? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Open SIF, Day 1. Over the next 2 days, we're going to have some presenters who submitted some talks, some very brief talks over a wide variety of subjects that we think are actually very interesting to the audience. I won't spend a lot of time here as we have a very tight schedule, so I will introduce the first speaker, Afef Abrougui, and she's going to be talking about ranking digital rights methodology. Afef?
Hi everyone, my name is Afef Abrougui. I currently work with Social Media Exchange. It's a non-profit organization that is based in Beirut and that advocates for an open and free internet in the Arab region. Over the past months, I've been working with SMEX on adopting the ranking digital rights methodology and using it for more localized research about mobile operators in the Arab region, and more specifically the policy disclosures and free speech policies. And before I get into more details about what we are doing at SMEX and our research, I would like first to give the floor to Rebecca McKinnon to talk more about what ranking digital rights is before I get into more details about the research.
Thanks very much, Afef. And Afef has been working with us for several years now and is really just doing brilliant work. So just to give some, Afef asked me to give a very brief presentation to explain what ranking digital rights is, so that you can then see how she's using our research framework and applying it in the MENA region. So what we are doing with ranking digital rights is we developed a methodology to evaluate the world's most powerful internet, mobile, and telecommunications companies on their commitments and disclosed policies that affect users' freedom of expression and privacy. And so our 2017 index evaluates 22 companies. That was what we had resources to evaluate. And as you'll see, we tried to pick a selection of companies that when you add them up, they touch the digital lives of most of the people, most of the world's internet users are affected collectively by these 22 companies, and you'll see where they're headquartered in a range of companies, but in a range of countries, but obviously they're operating in many more countries. So this is an overview. We actually have a pamphlet that's distributed on some of the tables that gives more detail. The purpose of my overview is not to give you all the detail of the results. You can see that online later. But to give you a sense, most companies did quite badly. This is the breakdown of the overall score just of the internet companies, and it's less about who scored well and more about the fact that everyone did poorly. They all just did poorly in different ways. And these are the telcos, which is the focus of Afef's work in the Middle East, North African region. And as you can see, the telecommunications companies are particularly doing poorly overall. But when you drill down on our sets of different indicators. We have a set of indicators that are about freedom of expression. Are companies being transparent about what content they're blocking, what their policies are to handle government requests, what their policies are around network shutdowns, around network management? Very, very little transparency. And you'll see that companies operating in the developing world, to the extent that they got scores, it had to do with the fact that they're transparent about what they don't allow. But that's pretty much it. And when you drill down to some of the privacy indicators that I think Afef will talk about as well, you'll see that there's very little disclosure about requests, and this is freedom of expression again, requests that governments and other entities are making to restrict content, to restrict accounts, very little transparency at all. And when it comes to disclosure of network shutdowns, also very little transparency about what's happening, what kind of government requests companies are getting. When it comes to privacy indicators and disclosures about how user information is collected, with whom it's being shared, how it's being used, very little transparency about that across the telcos that we evaluated at a global level, and just looking at their home country operating markets. And so Afef will talk a bit more about sort of what they're finding in the Middle East. And then we have on our website, we get into recommendations for companies as well as for governments. But across the board, there needs to be impact assessment. There needs to be much more transparency about what companies are doing. And there needs to be grievance and remedy mechanisms, and there needs to be much stronger security practices, and companies need to demonstrate their commitments. Of course, we also need governments to make all of this possible, which is the other challenge. So that's a very quick overview, and I'll hand it back to Afef to talk about how she's applying this framework in MENA.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, as Rebecca mentioned, the Ranking Digital Rights research basically includes 22 internet and telecommunication companies. And this includes companies that actually have operations in the Arab region, like Etisalat, Orange, or Vodafone. But why we're doing this research is basically we're aiming to build on the research that is already done by Ranking Digital Rights, because as Rebecca mentioned, Ranking Digital Rights evaluates companies at the group level and the operating level in their home, like in the home countries, like Orange France, for instance, or Orange is evaluated according to its disclosures at the group level and in its French market. So as a way, we don't know very much about what's happening, or like what kind of disclosure or what kind of information is Orange or other companies like Vodafone are actually revealing in other countries in the region where they are operating. And the second reason we're also doing this research is basically because for years now, at least in the Arab region, the focus has kind of always been on governments, except from what we hear about sometimes in like news reports when it comes to human rights and the internet and in general freedom of expression and privacy. The focus to some extent has always been in government, except, you know, there has been like the case of Vodafone or other operators in Egypt, for instance, shutting down their networks during the 2011 revolution against Hosni Mubarak. So I'm gonna talk a bit about what the research is and what we are exactly doing. So Ranking Digital Rights basically have 37 indicators. This includes indicators in freedom of expression, privacy and policy commitment, but we are only using 8 indicators in total. So the research is basically divided into 2 parts. The first part is a mapping of all mobile operators in the region and their policy disclosures in the region. And here we're talking, when we talk about the Arab region, we are looking into 22 countries that are members of the Arab League. So the first part of the research, we are not basically seeking to analyze the substance of the documents or the content of the documents, as much as we are simply asking the question of whether an operator actually publishes terms of service or a privacy policy. We are also looking into whether these operators publish transparency reports, or they have like a human rights policy affirming commitments to users' free speech and privacy rights. The second part of the research, and so far, when it comes to the first part of the research, I'm going to share a bit some findings. Out of 66 mobile operators, only 14 mobile operators actually publish terms of service, and only 5 publish privacy policies. And when it comes to transparency reports and human rights policies, it's a bit tricky because we have operators like Orange or like Vodafone. They do a firm commitment to human rights at the group level, but that commitment is kind of non-existing at the level of, you know, the subsidiaries like in other countries, which is kind of also a tricky question of how to look at. Like, is it enough if a company, you know, makes this commitment at the group level, or particularly when it comes to markets where it's the human rights situation, it's very difficult. I think it raises a lot of questions. And the second part of the research, so here, okay, the first part of research kind of shows that there were very minimal disclosures. And to move to the second part of the research, basically what we did is that we kind of did read the different terms of service and try to identify some different, like, identical themes that kind of appear like in each of the documents that we were like analyzing. And we decided to do to analyze these terms of service, to analyze using 4 indicators, and to analyze the free speech policies of these operators. And we are basically looking into very basic questions. I guess if you try to compare to rank digital rights, these are very basic in the sense that, but this is also because there isn't as much information available for us to kind of analyze. So we're looking whether a company, for instance, an operator publishes or has like the access to terms of service are easily available to users in a way that users can easily find them and can easily understand them, and whether an operator notifies users about changes to terms of service. Then we also look into the circumstances under which an operator restricts access to a service or to content. And finally, we look into whether the operator have in place grievance and remedy mechanisms that allow users, you know, to complain about to make complaints, and in particular to make complaints about freedom of expression. These are the indicators we are basically working on. How much time? 5, okay, that's good. So these are the indicators we've been using, only 8, but we're hoping that in the future we would be able to also build on this kind of research more, maybe include more service. I mean, right now we're focusing on mobile operators because basically for lack of resources, but also because increasingly users in the region, and I guess this is also a similar trend in other regions across the world, users are basically mostly accessing the internet through mobile networks. I mean, if you look at some of the figures that regulators provide across the region, in Tunisia, for instance, between 2013 and 2016, the mobile internet traffic grew by 16 times. And in Saudi Arabia, for instance, during the 3rd quarter of 2016, there were basically 25 million mobile broadband subscription compared to only like 3 million broadband subscription. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't look into ISP policies. And I guess this is the research is just, you know, a first step to kind of shed more light into the policies and practices of the private sector in the region. And hopefully in the future we will either at SMEX or like other organizers will hopefully to build on this, maybe include more indicators in the future. Who knows, maybe hopefully operators we will be hopeful that we will try to engage with them and that they would listen, and who knows, maybe they would reveal some more information, and that way we can add some more indicators, and maybe we can in the future analyze the privacy policies of the 5 operators that now have that do publish privacy policies. I think that's it for my talk. We can.
Okay. I would like to open up a few minutes. Thank you. To see if there are any questions to this particular topic. I will lead off. Do we have any microphones that we can pass around? Show of hands. How many questions do we have out there for Afef? I know you had coffee at lunch. So let me lead off. In the time that you've been working on this, have you had enough of a runway to actually see any trends in either directions, whether it's getting worse or whether it's getting more open and transparent?
Well, we kind of starting the research recently, so it's kind of not that
new.
That I mean, we don't really see trends. I mean, the only thing I noticed right now, at least when it comes to doing the research in the region, is that I've seen like kind of two positive examples and two small operators kind of having their privacy policies in terms of service available, which is kind of interesting because you kind of expect the bigger operators to do this, but to see kind of a mobile virtual network operator, you know, that only has like 1 or like 2% market share, like in Tunisia, to publish these documents, even though, you know, there isn't enough information available there, it's kind of good. I'm not sure if Rebecca wants to say something about the trends. No? Go ahead.
Okay. And in terms of the regions that you've actually been able to do research and find information on, are there any particular that are where you find it's difficult to access this information, and which areas do you see where it's a lot easier and a lot more transparent?
Well, I mean, I've done research for ranking digital rights before. I mean, I did research about Orange, which is like the Orange in France. Yeah. And what I noticed is, for instance, like some operators in their home like market countries, they would make sure kind of to make these documents available. Like Orange France, you know, it has its terms of service available for its different, you know, kind of services. But you go to Tunisia and you don't see any kind of disclosures, even though legally speaking, there is nothing that would, you know, prevent Orange from doing so. So that's kind of a trend that I've been kind of seeing, comparing, you know, companies like Vodafone and Orange and like how they behave like in other countries.
So what do you think facilitates that in their home country, where is it more policing, more enforcement that these documents have to be released versus the subsidiaries where they're working in, where
I wouldn't say it's policing, because you have very restrictive environments like that of the UAE and Qatar, and like Tisalat in the UAE does make its terms of service available to users. So in Saudi Arabia as well, I mean, there are like a couple of companies who do make their terms of service. I think it's rather maybe the lack of I guess maybe it's the lack of independent regulators making sure that telecommunication companies make these documents available. I mean, the UAE has a very strong regulator, like it's, you know, whether, I mean, its practices affect users negatively or positively, that's a whole other story, but still, I mean, what I noticed that there's a strong regulator. And so I think it's probably also the lack of, you know, maybe the law is there that you need to make these documents, but also like companies maybe don't implement them because no one is actually making sure that they do so.
Or demanding. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'd like to open it up to the floor. We have 2 questions here and a good 5 minutes to actually deal with them. So if there's microphones that we could go around. Okay.
I'm curious to see you, Maria Ressa from the Philippines. Rebecca, it's nice to see you again. Do you see a distinction between the hardware and software? And do you think either one of hardware or software is more accountable? Like if we needed to start someplace, should we be starting in one place more than another?
Shall I just get that briefly? I mean, this doesn't relate so much to Afef other than to say, you know, we looked at mobile, what we call mobile ecosystems. We actually look more at the software than the hardware per se, because it's the operating system and then tied to the app stores that's really affecting people's freedom of expression and privacy. And that, of course, links up to the mobile operators in the MENA region and also and elsewhere, because it's, you know, this question of the extent to which the mobile operators are also working with the, you know, the device makers and selling the devices in the region, and, you know, the extent to which they're enabling security updates, the extent to which the mobile operators are working with the authorities to gather data from the apps, you know, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's this whole kind of ecosystem of issues that's very much tied together.
Okay, and then we have a question in the back.
Thanks. My name's Tanya Luckett. I'm with Dublin City University and also Global Voices. So many other people here are. My question is, so I've looked at the sort of similar structures in Russia and mostly at internet companies, but what do you think are the levers of influence? Because you said that, large corporations that are present in so many markets don't feel the need to adhere to the same standards. What about the local operators? What are they being influenced by? Are they being influenced by the larger corporations and their lack of commitment to, disclosure? Are there any local pressure groups? Like, what's going on with the local operators?
Actually, at least when it comes to respect for human rights, like the local operators are it's probably even harder to engage with. I mean, it's not like we still haven't, reached like we still haven't done any advocacy work. I mean, we still haven't even published our research, but thinking about it and thinking about how we can use this research, I mean, at least when it comes to the region we're working on, it's kind of, it's a very diverse region in the sense that each country is different. You have like countries where there are like strong regulators, other countries like the regulators are not very strong, but you still have like a politically open environment where you can talk to the government and tell them, hey, maybe you should do this, And I know that at this stage, at least, I mean, as far as I know, there aren't like as many kind of much pressure going on the private sector. I know in Lebanon, like there has been like a couple of campaigns due to like very expensive, it's very expensive to access the internet, I think, or was it about the mobile rates, something like that. Campaigns actually in the region are mostly about like access or like high prices than it's about like disclosures or like, there has been also some campaigns against like the VoIP blocking in some countries, but it's mostly taking place online, and it's not that very organized. Like it's not really like lobbying the private sector like the government.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this particular talk. Thank you so much, Afef. So coming up next, we have Ritu Srivastava. I hope I didn't butcher your name. So this whole morning, and really mostly for this conference, we've been talking about digital rights. We've been talking about algorithms, ethics, privacy by design, and Ritu is going to give us an insight into some of the work she's working on in India to facilitate some of these issues.
Can I just be here?
You can either stand or sit if you want.
Okay. Hi everyone, and I'm working with Digital Empowerment Foundation, and which is providing the last mile connectivity and talking about the last mile connectivity in the primarily in areas. But when we are talking about data, this is a session about data ethics and how are we designing our things by privacy design itself. So this is something when we were thinking about it in our one of the research when we are trying to gather it, whether India has a 1.3 billion population and they are putting everyone on a biometric system when the system is called UID. It's inbuilt by design that you have to come on a system. But the question was that whether ethical handling of data is by design or whether it's been built in later on, where it lies actually when we are talking about data ethics, algorithms, and handling of ethical data by design. And this is something which we are trying to doing an advocacy for, that when you are handling a huge amount of data, you need to be ethically, it needs to be designed in a way that user privacy cannot be compromised. Users' rights and consent needs not be compromised. And so I'm more willing to listen from you guys as well about who is responsible for handling the data, private, corporate, or user themselves? Or when we talk about ethical usage of data, what do you mean by that? What do we mean by that? Whether we mean by that, whether who owns that data? Is it user owns the data or other people use that data? In a morning session, we heard about that Google follows the community policy, but who develops that community policy? Is it the user, the community itself is developing the policy, or some bunch of people who are gathering in a place and just developing the community policy on the behalf of the community? So who develops it? So all those questions, when we are trying to capture in one of the research, trying to capture, is something we are largely lagging in our India concept note itself. And when I'm talking about from an India perspective, there's no data protection policy, there is no privacy policy as such. And then we are making some systems which is talking about mandate to come on the board actually. So these are some of the ethical questions when we are trying to capture in one of our recent study as well. So even I would like to engage with some of the people as well. How are we engaging with our own data, and how are we ethically using our own data when we are using social platforms like a Facebook and Twitter and so often, whether we tell them that you use our data wherever? I never read that ethical policies there, except, and we usually accept it because it's so technically complicated and so small in letters, we can't read it, and we cannot do that. What is the ethical ways when these people can come and make the community-driven or user-driven policies? What are the ethical ways of handling those data? It's a basic gap I personally see from India and developing countries, that this is a largely gap which existed, and this is one of the emerging issues which existed. But how are we trying to solve the problem? And when we talk about it, in a name of a welfare schemes, in a name of a user connectivity, in a name of a access and last mile connectivity, everyone is talking about that they are providing some kind of a welfare schemes. It's not that truth. The truth is that you are taking the data. Data is a new oil. You are using that oil. How are you ethically managing that data? There's no transparency. The transparency report does not even talk about how data has been used, how often they had been used, how many times they have sold my data, how often they have resold my data, whether. So those are the ethical challenges. And when we were trying to do our research, it's the basic fundamental problems that they do not want to give that transparent. They do not own that answer. How do we get that answer? That's also one of the challenge.
So I want to give you a question in this way. Take, for example, in most countries have a constitution. And you can assume that most of the population has not read the constitution, but one exists. One knows that there are rights enshrined within said constitution. So with end-user license agreement, privacy statements for companies, is the importance that one exists, or that users are educated in the content of what's there?
I think it's both of things are important, that user license agreement should be read, and awareness for that particular user license should be given to the users as well. And same time, the country where do not exist privacy or data protection or how to handle these kind of ethical values can also be put in a place at the same time. I'm not very sure how private or corporates are using and selling those things, and how are they influencing the government, because they say that it's a closed door meeting. They are engaging with them, but how are they engaging with them? My question is that they should tell that how are they engaging, and how is that particular users, their community is engaging with them. So it's a two-way or three-way process. Then we need to be open about it, that how did they engage with the government, how did they engage with the other people, and how did they develop that particular policy. Whether they have developed is there any process to develop those policies? Is there any process for develop their own user agreements or not?
Yeah. So in the case of India, can you give us insight on what the layman on the streets, what do they think about whether those rights exist, whether they're educated about them, or is it simply for them about the use of a particular tool and completely not concerned about their own privacy or their own information?
So we did one research, and we figured out that some of the even we went to the rural regions of the country, and we figured out that people do understand about the privacy. People do understand that this mobile phone belongs to me, and the data, if it is stolen, then it's stolen. They do worried about that. And specifically for a women, it's the data is any data which is leaked out is very private. So even they understand what is the private thing, because a country like India, where mobile phone is also a family asset. Mobile phone, if you are owning a mobile phone, it can be used by your brother, anyone can use it. But once you have a mobile phone and once you have that private ownership, people do understand the privacy. They do not, that's why they lock their door, and that's why they lock their mobile phones as well at the same time. So they do understand it. But it's been a pushback by the state as well, that we are doing for the welfare schemes and we are doing for the good for you. Doesn't mean that you can corrupt the privacy itself.
Now, in this topic of ethics itself, you have corporate ethics, and then I guess you could say governance ethics in that time, when in relation to data itself. Whose job is it to enforce the other?
I think it's both the jobs to enforce each other, actually. If state is not implying that thing, then the citizens have a right to ask about the privacy law and the data protection law at the same time, and we do agree with that. And we are doing a larger advocacy, and most of my colleagues who are here and in India are talking about this day to day, every day. And if we are seeing everyday tweets about our Aadhaar system or UID system, and also about if same time it's a corporate job, and the government has to push that that private needs to incorporate the privacy laws in their paradigm shift as well. They cannot blindly, they cannot say that the country does not have a data protection or the privacy law. We will not imply with that. They have to imply with the privacy and data protection law, and the design has to be maintained with the privacy. It's not about that. The design has to be ethical ways of using of the data as well. Yeah.
So, in your perspective, as society are moving into more data-driven environments, where systems are, and digital economies are a lot more intertwined as we go forward, the rules that govern that data collection and the ethical use of it, what's your perspective on how restrictive should they be? Should they be designed in such a way that it's restriction first or it's use first, and then restriction follows? Meaning that we know that no piece of technology is good or bad. It's a double-edged sword. The same with data. Where should that protection of that data lean? Overprotection or liberalization of its use?
I think that it becomes, it's always a two-sword kind of a thing. When the data is against used by community or our users, it's not a good thing. It's something that if my data has been sold without having my consent, then it's a problem. Then it's a problem for me, actually.
So it needs to be a participatory process.
It needs to be a participatory process. It needs to be a transparent process. It needs to be an accountable process, that how the data is going to be used. There's one of a research organization, Center for Internet and Society. They did a research on mobile applications, and how safety mobile apps being used by women, and they were doing how much data they collected, and they were maximum number of data they were collecting on the ground. One of the application was collecting about 90 data sets from the particular person. Do they really need it? So when you are designing the such applications, do you really need so much of information, or you are just collecting the data because you want to collect the data, or you want to capture as much as possible?
And they were not being transparent in
And
why
they
were collecting that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ritu? So apparently we're the only ones in the room.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
Hi, this is Farooq from India and the United Arab Emirates. How is your work being seen in India? By the government, I mean.
I think, so in India is a very tricky situation. When you talk about last mile connectivity and other stuff, India sees very well actually. But when you start talking about UID and Aadhaar system, they do not want to interact with us. So India is very tricky in every sense, in that sense. When you start talking about privacy and other stuff, they really do not want to engage with us. We are conducting a research on what is the impact of social impact of network shutdowns. And we really want to go and talk to government, but they are not willing to talk to us with us as well. So it's a very tricky situation and it's always a two-way sword as well, because when are they willing to talk about it? And same applies with the corporates as well. When they are willing to talk about it, it's some situation like a shutdown. They are willing to talk about that thing, but when we are talking about the net neutrality, they are not willing to talk about it. So it's always that the situation where our position lies as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, looks like you told them everything. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And coming up next, we have Dubravka Simonovic. How did I do? Would you like to sit or present?
What would you prefer?
How about we sit and have a conversation?
Okay, good.
All right, perfect. So, tell me about what you're working on in terms of Femicide Watch.
So let me start by introducing myself. I am Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Its Causes and Consequences, appointed by Human Rights Council. Mm-hmm. And as a Special Rapporteur, I do publish thematic reports. I visit countries and produce reports, but I also publish thematic reports on different topics. When I started with my mandate, I started to focus on Femicide Watch, and I have decided that issue of femicides is going to be also long-term focus of my mandate. I have noticed that femicides, or gender-related killings of women, are going on in all parts of the world. And there is no official data on numbers of such killings. States do collect data on homicides, but not on femicides specifically. And it is very important to extract data from homicide data on femicides in order to see what is going on with respect to this, the most horrible form of gender-based violence against women. And now we are seeing that process is going in the direction that some countries are extracting and having such data, but those are minority countries. It is important to have comparable data for all countries. So I have, in 2015, launched an initiative and called all United Nations member states to establish a Femicide Watch. And what is the meaning of this Femicide Watch? The idea is that the first step is collection of data on gender-related killings of women, on femicides. So this is the first thing, and we do not have such data now. And second step would be to not only to look into such data as numbers, but to look into concrete cases, to have at the national level interdisciplinary bodies or independent bodies or NGOs that will look into specific cases and that will analyze each and every case of femicide to see what happened in that case, to see faces, to see stories, to see what was not done properly by national systems. Was it a problem with legislation in a criminal justice area? Was it a problem with police officers that did not react promptly? Was it a problem maybe with public prosecutor or someone else? In order to see what are systemic changes at the national level. It's basically to use data as a preventive tool, to focus on preventions. And here I'm coming to internet because I'm traveling to other countries and I'm trying to see how they are collecting such data. And I have seen some examples how NGOs are collecting data on femicides. And when I visited Australia, I had an official visit. It is one NGO there that is collecting data on femicides and putting them on internet. And last year they had collected 74 cases of such gender-related killings, and government confirmed such data. And it is important to see that NGOs could press the governments to do that type of a job, because that would be done by governments. Yeah. It is not only in Australia. In UK, there is another example of NGO with name Femicide Census. They have started to collect such data for past 5 years. So they are collecting data, they are putting data on internet, they are very cautious about protection of privacy and everything else. But in terms of numbers, it is important to see the numbers and in the future to see how we could compare different countries, because to such numbers we can see which countries are having good laws, good preventive measures, how they are really preventing such violence. We are also seeing specific cases that are before different courts, but also at international level, because, for example, CEDAW committee is receiving cases related to femicides, and from those cases, jurisprudence at the international level, and also we could look at regional levels, their mechanisms. We are seeing that in a number of cases there are systemic problems related, for example, to inefficient protection orders that should have protected women victims of violence, domestic violence, and so on, but they are not protected. So basically, in that report that I have published, I have called all states to collect such data, but collection of data should be done in a way that we should be able to see data related to intimate partner femicides and family-related femicides. So it is important to see that through number of cases, what is coming on in this area, but also in different country contexts, there are also another gender-related killings. But the big group is intimate partner violence and family-related femicides. Yeah. And focus should go there to see how to prevent such cases. So as a preventive tool, it should focus.
So in just that category alone, whether intimate partner or family-related femicide, that's pretty tight. So in terms of like collecting the data on those, what are some of the indicators that would give you a clue as to which side that is, and how do you collect that data?
So this is an important question, because in the future, it would be important to have data that is connecting victim with the perpetrator, to have this relationship between victim and the perpetrator. Correct, yeah. And currently, countries are not collecting such data. For example, if you ask judiciary or police force, they will have perpetrators, and they will have perpetrators desegregated by sex, who is female, who is male, and same with victims. But they do not have data that is collecting this relationship between victim and perpetrator. And this is a new challenge for statistical officers, but also for police officers, for judiciary and so on, to collect such data in order to see which are intimate partner femicides and family-related femicides. For example, I have visited Argentina, and now in Latin American countries, a number of countries do have specific provisions in criminal law with the name femicide. So now they are collecting at judicial level cases, and they have number of cases of femicides, but only those cases that reach judiciary and not others, because there are many cases that are not prosecuted, there is huge impunity, and such cases are not counted. But it would be important to count all cases of gender-related killings in order to see what is happening at the level of provinces, of country, to have comparable data for different regions, parts of the world, and then to focus on prevention of such cases in the future.
Well, and obviously in collecting data in different regions and in different countries on these very specific killings, you're going to run into situations where there's data maturity in one country, but inefficient data collection in other countries, and also the fields in which you're collecting and classifying those the violence is not the same. So how are you able to identify those specific things, even though they may be classified differently in different regions, different countries, and different constituencies, and customs as well?
This is beginning of the process, and this is challenge. So for that reason, it would be important for countries to cooperate, to see how they will collect such data in the future. Right. But they need to start, they need to focus on such collection of data in order to see where we are and how to prevent such cases.
So your advocacy is in making sure that femicide is not off the radar.
Yes, and to see from homicide cases, how many cases are in this category of femicides, and then to go to analysis of cases to see how to prevent such cases. Because in each country context, you can see some differences. Sometimes it's problem with law, sometimes it's implementation of law, sometimes it's
customary.
Yes, yes, of course. So there are many differences, and I'm not saying that we should have the same, I don't know, standard, but in a way of kind of approaching the whole area and to focus on prevention, it is something that should be at the level of all countries, something that is similar.
Agreed. And so the data collection part is one thing. Now moving on to the sensitization, on making sure you can collect the data, but what can we do to get to a future where that data is no longer needed because it's not, femicide is not happening. Yes, that's utopia, but that's where we're all trying to get to.
It is a long way to go, but I have seen also in some countries there are homicides review panels, and they are already analyzing different homicides, what happened in different contexts and so on. Now they have to go a step a little bit further in order to see those social circumstances, what happened with respect to femicides and what is very specific for gender-related killings, in order to focus on prevention, what is needed and how to avoid such systemic issues in the future. And it is also very important that now we do have a SDG agenda that was mentioned this morning, Sustainable Development Goals, and goal number 5, target 2, is clearly focusing on elimination of violence against women. And if we are serious on elimination of violence against women, we should look at these most horrible forms of violence against women and focus on femicides and their prevention, and also on data that will show us how we are progressing. Are we really able to decrease violence? How we are decreasing violence with measures that we are undertaking? So I think that this tool could provide in a future significant model related to prevention, but it is also related to use of internet, because up to now we have seen that data is usually collected to different collection of data by, prevalence studies and so on. And it's a long-term process. And then statistical data are not really used. They are somewhere outside with statistical offices and so on. But in the future, we have to use data and to collect data in a much faster manner. Now with internet, why not? Because now each one can, to open sources, say in this and that country, in this and that period, that number of women were killed. And this is open source. So that could be a challenge for governments because they need to have such data. And then they need to see how to really prevent such killings.
Agreed. And this is where it becomes important, making sure that even at the last mile that there is connectivity, so that you can't collect information from people who are not connected and you can't reach.
Yes. And then to have kind of knowledge about the whole system, because, for example, those that are doing different type of research in area of violence against women, they are collecting data on different types of violence, but they are not collecting data on femicides because those women are killed, so there's no one to interview. So we have to go in another direction to see this data on homicides and how from that type of data we could have data related to femicides.
Yeah, but also, again, as we're talking about data, it has to be in a form that you can disambiguate.
Of course.
It's in a, if it's in a file format somewhere in the back of a room, you're unable to actually get that. So we need to also talk about data digitization as well to help in that effort. Yes, questions? Oh, look. Yes, right here.
Hello, I'm Jesus Robles Malo from Mexico, and have two questions. One is to say that we are, as an internet-based organization called Enjambre Digital, my organization, we have now collaborated with a set of organizations that that have a purpose to reduce the rate of homicides in Mexico and in Latin America. That is probably one of the most higher rates in the world. And we are starting to make a debate on the name of the victims, because for us the name of the victim is important to have more information. But in Mexico there is a debate even in civil society about the name and the due respect to the victims. So what's your opinion on the name as a data?
As a data point.
As a data point. That's the first question. I have another comment. Have you received an invitation from Mexico or you plan to go? For us it's very important. We can make sure that our government invites you because, as you know, we have a pretty good law system related with femicide, but the rates are higher and keep climbing. So we want to make sure that you take a look to our country and give some ideas to keep doing our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I respond immediately?
Yeah.
Yes. With respect to your invitation, I'm very grateful, but I should be invited by the government, or there is also possibility of standing invitation from different governments, and then I can visit different countries. But there are also some limitations with respect to budget attached to my mandate. So if there are big donors that would give money to my mandate, I would be happy. This is one restriction. With respect to names, confidentiality rules are important, and you need to seek permission from the family. But if family is giving permission for you to have the name, then you can have the name. I am also for stories, because I'm seeing in Latin American countries that many iconic cases are used in order to change laws, to change implementation of laws, to change what is wrong in current system. And such cases are really sending strong messages, what was not done properly and what should be changed. I was in Argentina and I have seen this focus on femicides, but there are also other types of ongoing gender-based forms of violence against women that should be addressed also, because you could not focus only on one and then forget the other. With respect to collection of data, also I would like to mention that in Argentina, ombudsperson decided to establish a femicide watch as independent institution based on this report that I have published. And this is example how independent institutions, because they're in a good position, they have possibility to request information from all sources, from the government, from different institutions and so on, and then to go into cases, through analysis of cases. But if there is no such possibility, then it is really important for NGOs to focus into collection of data with with, if there are restrictions, you can use acronyms or something else, because it is important to have numbers, to have permission to have names. If you don't have names, then you use acronyms or something else. But at the end, to have collection of data to see, for example, how you compare situation in Mexico with respect to other countries in Latin America, then with respect to other parts of the world. Because in the future, maybe we are going to be able to establish what is the femicide rate if we count number of women killed with respect to number of women living in the country. So it would be important, like we have, for example, maternal mortality rates, to see how we are dealing with femicides.
Okay. We had another question. Yes, right here in the back.
Is this on? Yeah. So my question also touches upon data points, and I was wondering whether your work would sort of touch upon the network of factors behind any femicide. So, for example, in India, a lot of femicides would be against women from the Dalit caste who are from very poor families. So looking at the broader context of why exactly these women are in such a vulnerable position, and how would you react to situations of impunity where those kind of caste politics and caste relations facilitate those kind of femicides?
Thank you for this question, and let me address impunity, because impunity is extremely important, and I have also called countries, when they are collecting cases, also to collect data related to prosecution of perpetrators. And here, from this prosecution of perpetrators, we will see how large is this impunity and what is going on with respect to prosecution. With respect to different ethnic groups or castes, it is important also when there is collection of data on relationship between a victim and perpetrator, also to include specific ethnic groups or different divisions like caste in India, in order to have differences that relates to that specific situations. And we have seen, for example, in Canada, it was a case of gender-related killings of women and girls, Aboriginal women and girls, and it was inquiry done by CEDAW committee. So in situations like that, it would be important to see how Aboriginal women and girls are affected in comparison to non-Aboriginal women and girls in cases of femicides.
Yeah. So we have time for one last question right here in the back.
Thank you. My name is Åsa Aldén, and I'm with SIDA here in Sweden. And we met at the last panel on gender-based violence online. I was previously doing research in Turkey on femicides, and I have one question and one example that I think that you should look into, and that is, there is a media or a journal, an online journal in Turkey called Bianet, and they have systematically collected data on femicides since 2009, actually. So it's since a long time ago, and they do it monthly, and every month they publish this data, and they collect the data from media, which is also an interesting method, from local papers where there are reports on these killings. So that's a very interesting example, also because it goes back. My question is about the definition and the cases that you will include in the femicide category. You said intimate partner violence, and you said family violence. So what is the family, and how do you define intimate partners? Because a worry would be that you miss plenty of cases if you do this very narrowly. Like, I mean, because there are also cases outside this. I mean, at least the common interpretation of what intimate partners and family means. So that was my question. And I also want to congratulate you on a very, very important initiative, and I very much look forward to follow this process. Thank you.
So thank you very much. You have posed a very important question, because it is important to have comparable data at the end, and maybe I have not explained fully, because I have tried to see how we can direct countries to collect something that is comparable. And now there are, let's say, number of countries that do collect data on intimate partner violence. That includes husbands, ex-husbands, intimate partners, that category. But there are also, let's say, so-called honor crimes. They are under this category of family-related killings, so family in a broader sense. But I have also said, and all other types of violence, because there are other types of gender-related killings, that are not under these two categories, that are opening up possibilities to have all other femicides that are not under those two categories that countries are going to collect according to their, let's say, definitions of what is family and what is intimate partner. But all the rest should be included in this third category that could be under different names, but in a whole kind of area of collection of such data of femicide. So it should be inclusive. But in order to have possibility to start the process and to start with something, I have started with those two categories, intimate partner and family related, and other types of femicides, in order to have all-inclusive approach. With respect to case that you are mentioning and specific situation in Turkey, I am really glad that you have mentioned that, because I have called all states to send me such information. It is important to have them on a public website, and I'm trying to collect concrete cases on femicides and good practices and what is going on, in order to show what is happening in this area and how other countries could follow. So I'm very grateful for this. And I would also like to mention that I was at the previous panel on gender-based violence against women online, and next year I'm going to produce a thematic report on gender-based violence online, and we had very good panel that addressed that topic, and I hope that all of you that are at this forum will be able to send additional information related to cases or research or your experience in this area. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Raman.
Thank you.
And a hand. And so how many of you would consider yourself online advocates?
Yep.
Really? Not all of you? So, so one thing that we're going to talk about as our last panel, Walid Al-Sakaf is going to talk about social media analytics for online advocates. Who are you talking to? Who is listening to you? What topics move the conversation in what it is that you're trying to advocate for online? And to give you kind of a better sense, an informed strategy for your online advocacy and your conversations and the work that you're doing.
Okay. You'd be surprised, TMS, because I actually am reversing roles right now, and I'll be actually talking about you.
Oh, boy.
It might surprise you to know that I've read your history in the last few days on Twitter, and I'm putting you on the spot.
I was not expecting this.
Yeah, that's many say that in my presentations. Okay, so what do you see here? What is this? If you see the screen,
so
can you relate to this?
This is a word cloud.
Exactly. What is it about?
I'm going to say that you scraped everything I've written.
Exactly. Well, more or less.
Yeah, more or less.
You can relate to the words?
Yeah, I can relate to the words.
Exactly. So basically what I've done is took your history timeline of the last few days in relation to SIF and put them together in a word cloud to know exactly how you think, what you've been interested in.
So I think about the internet a lot.
Yeah, indeed, and problems I can see here. And you've also been quite active, over 43 tweets at least until early today, and also 81 with retweets. So you're quite active. You're number 14. There are still 13 people ahead of you, so you have some work to catch up for.
Excuse me while I tweet.
Ed, it's a bit too late though. You can work on it for the last day because we'll have a report.
Perfect.
So what I've tried to also show is that you also have a network, and this is your network.
Wow.
And it's if you zoom in and try to find where you are right now in this wonderful network of people who are actually have been tweeting in the last few days, and if I were to try to find exactly how you have been behaving or whom you are communicating with, I like to see the direct communications, the direct circle, and this is your circle. These are the people that you communicated with, and you can already see the faces. You can relate. Okay, I remember what happened.
So don't you need consent to get this kind of data?
Apparently, you have not read the terms of use of Twitter. Well, this is not to put the spotlight on my poor fellow here. All I'm saying is that your data is open, and everyone is looking at it, and everyone has been doing it. Governments have been doing this for a long time. Corporations are doing it all the time. And why not us, advocates? We also have the power within us to use the data more effectively, to understand who are the people around us, who are the people around the ones we are trying to investigate or try to explore, and then draw a mental picture of where can we be if we had changed our behavior online so that we can introduce better ways. So what I've done is basically used a tool. This is called Micodify. It's an open source tool that I've created on part of the postdoc at Stockholm University. The bottom line is that we wanted, as advocates, researchers, to find an open source tool that allows us to plot these things without paying money to the big fish, and to enable us to do the exact same things with free of charge and in a way that is accountable to the general public. So if you can look at this graph here, it basically illustrates the number of tweets and retweets that had taken place in regards to SIF 17. And you'll notice, of course, there's a huge spike today. But something interesting is that this data cannot tell you much until you drill into it and you understand what happened during these periods. So one way in which you can do that through this tool is to look at the hashtags. These are a combination of hashtags that have been created, and many of them have different subject matters. So there should be a way for you to simply zoom in to understand a particular hashtag, for example. Let's say power. So if you click on power here, you get the exact line that has something to do with power, and you get to see the tweets, the individual tweets that have tweeted about this, and you get to see who of these tweets had the highest number of retweets, so that you understand these individuals were more popular on this subject at that time. So you can do this over and over. You can do it for images, you can do it for videos, links, etc. You can filter, you can explore. In fact, I can tell you right now, TMS, that you're an avid Mac user, and you're using a tool called Tweetbot, and sometimes Instagram. And this information is already public, and in fact, you had an interesting conversation. I don't know if I'll take it this far, but what the heck. You wanted to see some people in Stockholm to meet for coffee, and then you got a response. I don't know, I may not want to go that far. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what I can do. And this is what you can do too. So now that you understand this is possible, and this is what everyone can do in this room, and you can do much beyond that.
You're all invited for a drink.
You need to also consider the potential that if you're not aware of what is being done behind your back on your own profile, then you might be in trouble as well. You need to understand that what I've done here is a very simple illustration of what governments are doing all the time. They're looking into, okay, who's active and who's not. How many are what we call bridges? Bridges are people in the network. Let's say if we take the SIF network today and we look into the whole group of people that are involved. This is the SIF network. And if you'd like to know who are among the most important bridges, bridges meaning the people who connect groups with each other. For example, this person here would be a bridge because it connects to a whole bunch of other people. There are other people that are very influential in this stage. So what governments have done in the past is that they've looked into these maps and identified bridges and targeted them. It's extremely important to understand why this is important. I've done research on the Egyptian case, and I realized that the most well-connected blogger is Ala Abdel Fattah, and he now is in jail. You can tell that governments are not naive, but they are taking advantage of the fact that advocates are unaware of these tools, are not able to perhaps use them. So my invitation through this idea is to basically let you understand that with a bit of skill, with a bit of know-hows, practice, you can get to explore the main actors in any network, not only in this network. And you can do that through a number of metrics. Among these metrics is called betweenness centrality. Those in social science or social network analysis would understand what I mean. But it basically shows the people who are actively connected to other people and serve as excellent bridges. Another very important metrics is called the degreeness or degree centrality, and there's also the eigenvector degree centrality, meaning that not only can you look into whom you are connected with, but how powerful the people you are connected with. So it's not only a matter of being connected, you need to also be strategically connected. And this tool, it's called Kumu. It's available for you to use. It's a Silicon Valley company, but it's free for a demo. But the purpose here is to tell you that it's impossible for anyone to hide anything right nowadays. If you are going to go public, you better be aware of what is going to happen with the data that you have. Additionally, you can always steer the data towards something positive. Let's say you have a campaign. The campaign is for after a shutdown, and the campaign is using a particular hashtag. Let's say bring back our internet or something of that nature. You need to know who among these people using this hashtag are the most influential. You have multiple ways of knowing that. First, you can know in terms of bridges. These bridges, for example, in SIF are, first is the actual account of the Stockholm Internet Forum, and then is Sida's account, and then it's Hannah McCarrick, and then Advocate Mayor. All of these are extremely important bridges. Nena,
wow,
and you are actually on the 6th, yeah, congratulations, TMS. So you can tell there are many interesting ways in which you can understand and analyze data. And you can also do some sort of hierarchy or, let's say, ranking to see the number of people, not only in terms of the number of retweets or tweets, but also in the number of followers. So you'll notice that today there was one interesting pattern that emerged. One of the main people who tweeted had actually 2.6 million followers. And that's the Rappler account. It's incredibly important to understand who is who's following your hashtag. In this case, we've seen that this particular account had produced, in fact, 13 tweets about the topic. So if I were the organizers, I'd send a thank you note. These people bring in more people, extend your network, and allow you to communicate and get your message further apart. There's also an interesting thing to know visually how your presence in a particular network is powerful or not. It's basically to try to visualize that a particular opinion is driving the rest. So let's say I wanted this fellow here to, this fellow would have an interesting opinion about something and wants to sway the rest. So if you pull this way, the results in is this movement. But if we take the Stockholm Internet Forum and move it here, look at what happens. Everyone else follows because it's central. The more nodes you have, the more connections you have, the more powerful you can impact in the overall conversation. And apart from that, you can also link the discussions, the conversations to the individuals. So for example, if I were to take the response network, this is a response network, meaning that there are some people in the network that respond to each other. So this particular account, Nena's account, seems to have a lot of people connecting to it. People are mentioning Nena quite often. And she is and she is trying to respond, not fully responding. There are a couple of people whom she responded to. So that's a very good sign. Other accounts might not be like TMS. He's not responding in this case. I don't know. Did you respond?
Well,
not with the SIF.
I've been kind of busy.
You were busy. So you can see red meaning not responding. And so these indicate the level of interaction. There are some people who keep on sending to everyone else, like, but not necessarily getting a response, at least a response with the hashtag SIF. So how easy, then you'll come to the question, how easy is it for me to use this tool? The first thing you can do is go to mecodify.org, and there you'll get to get the context of what this tool is about. Whereas, I mean, like any academic environment, you have to read a bit. We don't want you to just jump into a software and use it. Read what it means, what it does, where it can be used. Basically, it started for helping researchers understand the impact of social media on conflict. And it started with Egypt, Kenya, Serbia, and where else? Kenya, Serbia, Egypt, and South Africa. Yeah, you already know? Okay. So these countries. So then you move on to other case studies. You understand that there might be a conflict that happened. For example, you may recall the Stockholm, Open Stockholm hashtag that I mentioned earlier. In fact, I did an analysis of that particular account, and what I found was remarkable. During a very short period of time, the hashtag Open Stockholm had led to an enormous number of following. It started with a very, very limited number of people around a particular person who started, let's say, saying, okay, let's put up the Open Stockholm hashtag, and then it led to a whole universe interacting with it. This is the first, I'll give you the first minute. This is basically the first minute. You see, there have been some, these are the ones that are not connected have not been involved in discussion, but these are the only people here that have been involved. And so you can tell then after 5 minutes, it started to grow. And then you can animate this over 10 minutes, you begin to realize, okay, I started to use a different graphic here to illustrate because of the speed of the machine. But then you move on to 15, it goes further and further, and then in just 30 minutes you get even this, a massive explosion of tweets about the topic. And then you end up, it goes on until the first day, and then you have a mass amount of people talking about it. It started with one simple initiative. That's why when I said early in the morning, and I'd like to thank Nadia, my sister, for her open attitude to accepting my criticism, is that not anyone can make a difference is a fallacy. There can be a way for you to make a difference. But if you really don't understand how social media works, what to do in a hashtag, how to measure your impact, how to ensure that you reach an audience that might be the ones that propagate your message further, then you're losing the opportunity. But on the other hand, if your timing is right and your idea is genuine, and you have the ability to reach out to the communities and see to it that you respond, because the originator of this hashtag actually made sure that she responded to every single reply that she received. And over time, you begin to understand that any person, no matter how many followers he or she has, can make a difference. Finally, let me point out to something that I discovered over the years, when I've been working on social media, is that if you are going to use any form of social media and explore the opportunities of using it for your campaigns, your advocacy, you need to also be aware of the drawbacks. The drawbacks, and sometimes I call it the backlash. The backlash is that there's a new phenomenon happening nowadays. It's called say hashtag hijacking. Hashtag hijacking. Let's say I'm illustrating to you one particular case in which the Open Stockholm hashtag basically went out. Unfortunately, it went out of its way, and instead of promoting the goodness of the hashtag, it led to something quite awful. These are examples of tweets that have been released after a few days after the Open Stockholm hashtag was published, and it reflected some sort of people who are trying to use the hashtag for their own purposes. They're trying to create hatred, promoting some sort of counter narrative, blaming it on the Swedes, blaming the attack on the Swedes. So it does mean something that we all need to be aware of. It means that once the genie is out of the box, it's out of the out of the bottle, it's out of the bottle. So you cannot guarantee that it will always be positive. You should always be aware that there can be negative repercussions of the hashtag. As a journalist, as an activist, that is even particularly more relevant, because if you start a campaign and you think naively that no one will actually counteract the campaign, then you are into a big trap. What you need to do is consider that there are people who are going to use the hashtag like this and put up a particular image that would link people to your hashtag in a negative way, and that would lead to even worse results. I can imagine that whoever started the Open Stockholm hashtag, I'd like you to explore the story for yourself, that she might not have considered the consequences, but it's still, I would bet that she would do it again if she had the opportunity. The problem here is not with her, the problem is that there are some people in this world that do not appreciate the things that some others are doing. And it's in human nature. We discussed that earlier a couple of days ago, is that you can't really change, frame the internet outside the humanities conditions that we live in. So humans are humans, whether they're offline and online. But I like to end today with a very nice tweet that I found the other day, is that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So through hashtags like Open Stockholm, through efforts to promote advocacy through online activities, it will always be possible for you to come back even after a temporary setback. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Question time?
So I was going to have a friendly conversation with you, but
now you can grill me.
Yeah,
it's your turn.
Well, while I'm still stunned and feeling naked on stage, I'm gonna let everybody else ask you questions. Unfortunately, it's gonna be short, unless you'll allow me for a few extra minutes.
We were told
we have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Perfect. So if you could please make him as naked as possible. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Maria. Fantastic tools that you just showed. I've been immersed in trying to get those trends from other platforms that exist. I find this really useful. So I've got a very important question. How much going back in terms of history can you track hashtags, and can you track also the history of people? And the only reason I'm asking is usually that's the biggest challenge somebody has. If you have a hashtag that has been going on for quite a long time, it's very difficult to track it. And a second, where I've tried to immediately, as soon as you put up, that's what I do, I always go online and try to check. I'm seeing that the mechanism is still being developed, so it's not complete. So if you could maybe just very quickly touch on that. How is it possible to be part of that project? Thank you.
Great questions. The first question, can Mecodify go back in time? The answer, delightedly, is yes. It's the first ever tool that can take you back in time. The only problem is that it is quite slower than usual, so it will take it maybe 5 times slower than you'd use the API. And there are a set of other cons. You know, like any academic work, you need to put up the limitations, and there's a whole white paper for you to read. But it is possible, and it's been used for the research that we've developed. The second question is even more critical, is that like these open source projects where we have no corporate funding behind them, I've personally been asked many times, why don't you go for making it a corporate company and then benefit out of this? You know, the same applied for another software I created that had helped people circumvent censorship. I mean, the bottom line is that I'm not, first of all, a good businessman, to be honest. I'm a good coder in some ways. I'm also an advocate for open source, for solutions that would benefit anyone, regardless if they have the money or not. That being said, I understand there are sustainability questions. So this is an open invitation. If any of you are interested in collaborating on funding opportunities and grants opportunities, bringing this to even a broader spectrum of people, because the underlying technology is open source anyway. It's libraries that are accessible, that you can use anytime. The ability to go beyond Twitter, to include Facebook, to include YouTube, to include other sources in news sources, in fact, to include your own website, if you have any, to plot your own website, to see your comments, the comments of your readers. This is also possible. It's just that it requires a bit of support. And I'm happy to say that there are some positive signs that there are colleagues, maybe some in the room, that have agreed to take the first step in having a joint proposal and writing more to help this tool become more successful. And the niche for this tool is that no matter what happens, it will always have at least a basic portion that is open source, so everyone can actually use it regardless of if you pay or not. The other important thing is to consider the users of these tools are going to remain quite ethical in their use. I hope so. Because you can use any tool. Technology is a conduit. It's a neutral tool. You can use it for good or bad. So I am optimistic that whoever uses these tools, who could have used any other tool, by the way, you could have paid money and used it, would use these tools for the good of society. So yes, it's possible to work together, and hopefully whoever is interested can see me.
Before we take on that extra question, yes, technology can be used for good or bad. I look at this tool as basically as a football, and advocates on one end of the pitch, adversaries on the other, governments, despots, whatever it may be, on the other side. Where do you fit in terms of worrying about it not being used for the good of humanity, as it were? How do you feel? I mean, how do you feel, like, for example, let me put you in, you're the government looking at my profile the way you just exposed me like that. How would you feel on the other side when governments use the very tool you used for good, you created for good, and they use it, for repression, for example?
Yeah, I'd say it helps open my eyes to the possibilities. One thing that is going on is that you might not know what your data can do to you. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you open your Gmail, you open your Google account, and then your geolocation is on, for example, then the things you search, the history, the emails you open, every single thing tells something about yourself. Your identity is reflected online. So you get to see that you might not see what happens afterwards, but with an open source tool, these actually get exposed. So you actually begin to learn what are the implications of these technologies. And that's one side benefit, is that it actually allows you to understand what limit you can do with this data. Because the other tools are closed, many of them are not user-friendly, so you might not be able to take the time to explore what you can do with it. So this would open up the horizon for awareness. You're aware of what would happen, so you act accordingly. You might not want to self-censor yourself, but you can at least understand your limits and how far I could go to put in a name of a person or a risk. So if it's about control, I cannot control. I'm just a coder.
Yeah.
It's just the person's own conscious awareness
to help them advocate better.
Exactly.
And smarter. Yes.
So interesting. Thank you, Walid. A couple of questions. One, there's a debate kind of in advocacy and activism about whether it matters about using hashtags anymore or not. It seems like this is a good, if you want to do this sort of analysis, using hashtags is useful. Is that accurate? Is that a good interpretation?
Well, it does tell you that there are risks associated with hashtags, but as I said earlier, there are also benefits, and it depends on the timing of it. So, for example, the Open Stockholm timing was excellent. It arguably helped people stay alive if it were really a threatening situation. So I wouldn't say it's useless or should not be allowed, but then awareness of what could happen later, and that's where. Consciously realizing the risk is also important.
And then the second question is, do you think that this type of tool could be useful to combat the so-called fake news or kind of disinformation in order to identify, say, nodes of amplification or origination of misinformation?
Yes, certainly. I mean, the research that we've been doing, and I've been trying to collaborate with colleagues at the LibTech to find ways on using Mecodify. The way that fake news usually works is botnets accelerate or try to propagate a particular streamline of thought. And so the way that the automated method of Mecodify allows you actually to cluster these together. So you can actually see a map. You see a lot of people interacting, but then there's a cluster of nodes that are suspiciously clustered with communicating with each other, are not interacting with other regular people. So slowly you begin to dig into the data and you realize, okay, this is the cutting point. This is where I draw the line. This is the actual data and news, and this is where fake news, at least individual bots, are operating. So there's lots to do in terms of researching this area, and it's promising to use visuals because visuals are much more powerful.
Let's go to the lady in the back, and then we'll come back to you. Is there a microphone back there? I have one here, but I don't think it's on.
We are running out of time, though.
Thank you. Hi, this is my name is An. I work with Midan, and it's a really engaging tool, and I love the positioning for this. And it got me thinking. This is more of a comment, and it's kind of a comment that I hope you can comment on. Is that it makes me reflect on the trend actually towards private networks and private chat apps that don't have open APIs, where it's more difficult to actually dig into networks. And so, in some sense, there's actually this trend around the world is actually creating an asymmetric access to information because. Governments and corporations will have access to the metadata around those networks, but there's a tool like yours. I'm curious if it can address closed networks and what that looks like, or if it can at least be used as an educational tool about the power of looking at metadata, even if many of these tools encrypt the messaging information. You can still get a lot of network information about who you're talking to and who the most influential people in a WhatsApp or like a WeChat network are.
I mean, theoretically, it would be possible to get consensus from all people in a particular room or a particular closed environment and have them grant access to the tool so that can grab the data and then analyze it. But obviously, I wouldn't imagine the consensus, but everyone agreeing that this would happen. So it's more of an ethical dilemma here. I mean, you would like to do research on this, but you have to get a consensus and agreement by all those involved. And those who might not want to participate would have to leave the room. So I can't answer the question, but I really realize it's quite a big limitation.
Okay, so one final question.
Hi, this is Farooq. You said you're not a good businessman. You've developed a great tool, obviously. So if you were to be approached by people who did not have the same values as you, so people in power or government, how are you going to deal with that situation? Of course, it's open source, but if they wanted your help in taking that further, this tool and what it can do.
I mean, you're putting all governments as if they're all bad. I mean, this government is good. So if it depends on the intention out of it. I mean, if it's something for good, something for positive, I'm willing to go on board. of course, there are some governments that you know almost for sure, for certain, that they wouldn't want to use it for good. So yes, I'll be quite suspicious and do my due diligence.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Walid, thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.
And that is Open SIF. We'll have another session tomorrow afternoon. So if you want to join us for more engaging short conversations about various topics, join us tomorrow at the same time, same venue? In the morning. Oh, tomorrow in the morning. So there you go. Coffee.